Welcome. I appreciate everyone being here today. We're going to be talking about some transportation. We've got some good information to hear. I'd like to open, if we could, with a prayer. Rick, would you give us a word of prayer, please?
Oh, yes, ma'am, Madam Chairman. Let's bow our heads real quickly. Heavenly Father, thank you for letting us be together. And these Georgians doing great things for other Georgians. Please bless us, keep us on track, keep us working together, and most importantly, keep us safe as we travel all across the state on our great roads. Listen, in your name, amen.
Thank you. All right, we've got some good information to have today. I don't have a preference. I guess we can start with you, Commissioner McMurray. Do you want to start us off?
Thank you, Chairman Taylor. I'll be glad to, and it's great to be with everybody virtually. Certainly miss being together as we all do, but certainly glad to continue the state's business in this manner, keeping everybody safe. My objective today is to share with you some information, a little bit about some of our accomplishments over the last year, especially in the light of COVID-19, and also talk a little bit about the traffic data we're seeing, which ultimately turns into revenue outcomes that translates into budget. And then we'll get into the amended 21 budget. Today with me here in the room, socially distanced, is our treasurer, Angela Whitworth, our GDOT budget director, George Christensen, Josh Waller, I think he's no stranger to any of you at the Capitol, Director of Policy and Intergovernmental Affairs, and also the Office of Planning and, Performance Management and Research, that's a mouthful, and also Janine Miller, our Director of Planning. So glad to have a great team here at GDOT that helps put all the budget information together and share. So look, with that being said, let me share my screen, or attempt to share my screen, and then we'll jump into the presentation.
The left.
You said, okay, here we go. They're giving me good directions here. So let's make sure this works. All right. 1 second. All right, now we've got the technology working. That's always good. Let me start with some FY20 outcomes and other information. I always like to focus on the bridges. We provide bridge inspections to cities and counties as well as our state-owned bridges and interstate bridges. And you can see that we did 7,500 inspections last year, which is very important. And also you can see the investment we've made last year in bridge maintenance and bridge replacements, replacing some 35 bridges across the state. Now, those are all good things, and we're seeing good outcomes. In fact, about 3% or less of all bridges in the state are considered poor condition. But when you do the math, there's over 1,500 bridges that still need to be replaced. So we're making good progress and enjoy some very good bridges in Georgia, but still a lot of work to be done. Also, I wanted to highlight to the top right of this slide is the amount of right-of-way purchased such that we can advance projects. Almost 1,700 parcels purchased last year. And once COVID-19 hit, we certainly had to start purchasing property differently by meeting with people where we used to meet with them at their kitchen tables or their offices, obviously virtually, and then closing of parcels became a little bit of a challenge due to courthouses being closed, but we worked our way and navigated our way through that with great success. You can see over $230 million of investment in right-of-way acquisition last year. That all translates into, between the bridges and the right-of-way, turns into how many projects we were able to bid out last year, some 301 projects totaling $1.27 billion. Not only did we bid that many, but we had about the same amount, 318 projects that actually opened to traffic that represented a $1.1 billion investment. And you can see there's still plenty of work going on as you navigate the states. You'll see plenty of orange cones and barrels out there that we have 440 projects that are still active, almost $1 billion. I always like to remind everybody of the work that Carl Vinson Institute did I guess 2 or 3 years ago now, looking at the investment of state dollars invested in transportation and what the yield or return on investment was. And that study concluded that for every $1 million invested in transportation, there was an economic return to Georgia indirectly of $850,000 for every $1 million invested. So that's the secondary benefit, not direct benefit to the construction industry itself. So when you take our 1.27 billion that we administered or bid out last year, that yields another $1.1 billion in economic impact, positive impact to Georgia. So I always like to think about that. And the thing I'm most proud of, I think, from last year is the bottom right corner of our small role that we play in COVID-19 relief. And I say it's a small role, and we say that humbly by helping GEMA and the Department of Health with over 450 resource requests in hauling supplies, providing traffic control and et cetera around the testing sites and ultimately vaccine sites. So just proud of the men and women that have contributed so importantly to this entire state effort of COVID-19 relief. So let me now move forward. Because it takes good people, I always like to highlight where we stand with staff levels. And you can see we finished up last year with a head count of about 3,664 employees. That's certainly a little bit lower than where we need to be. We need to get back to about that 4,000 level where we were in last calendar year back in 2019 into 2020 to have enough staff to continue to be able to respond to inclement weather emergencies and the like. We have a turnover rate of about 17% at the department. And last year, in fact, we had 615 people depart GDOT, of which we had to basically hire back. So we average about 51 separations a month and about 25 new hires a month. So we're trying to work our way back, and that's an important thing to do. It takes people to do all this work and the great job they do. So just always like to highlight that. And certainly the blue arrow on this slide is still applicable, that we're doing more than $1 billion of work more than we did back in 2015, of which we still had about the same amount of staff. So have to work smarter, and we certainly use a lot more consultant resources as well for that. Now, let's transition away from this, and I'll get to the next slide and update you on what we're seeing as it relates to traffic volumes across the state. So let me take just a moment to compare or to share with you what this chart means. And along the left side of the chart is percentages, and the blue arrow points to 0%. So this is a comparison of our rural interstates and rural state routes this year, or back into, you can see on the bottom left of your chart, back into about April or so. I think that's hard to see from my glasses, but you can see that the calendar is along the bottom axis, left to right. So we're comparing current traffic to a year ago traffic, same day. So a Thursday of January 21st back to January 21st of 2020 as an example. So the dark blue line are rural interstates. The dark blue line is the rural state routes. Basically, the 2 lanes are 4-lane roads. The light blue are the rural interstates. So as you can see, about halfway across this chart, those blue lines start going above 0%, which means traffic is back to normal and above normal, especially the further to the right you go, which goes through about January 3rd. I think that's about the first week of January that we have traffic for. You can see that traffic is higher than it was a year ago, which, to remind you, was pre-pandemic traffic a year ago. So that is a very positive trend that we're seeing. Now let's look at the urban areas, the urban state routes and the urban interstates. The purple is urban state routes. The red is urban interstates. And you can see again the arrow pointing to 0%, which would 0% is traffic would be the same amount as it was a year ago. So as you can see in the urban areas, the traffic is lagging a little further behind than we've seen in the rural areas part of the state. But the good news as you look into sort of November, December-ish, and now into January, that traffic volume is touched back to normal a few times. And also now it's within 10% pretty generally on a weekly basis, within 10% of normal. What is missing on the left side of this chart was the worst of the worst, which was back right around Easter, where we saw traffic volumes down 50 and 60%. So I think these charts tell a good story about how Georgia is still open for business and the policies in place that, you know, encourage business to operate in a safe manner. We're seeing that play out with this traffic data, especially our next chart. And let me move to it. This chart is a little different. This is actually truck volumes on all our interstates in Georgia. The orange line is the current volumes. The gray lines are a year ago volumes. And I think what you can see is very shortly after the pandemic started, the orange lines go above the gray lines, which means that we're seeing truck volume on the interstates consistently exceed the volumes from a year ago pre-pandemic. And I think this tells a great story of how, as you all know, the supply chain reoriented itself as it had to supply citizens of Georgia at home, and very differently than how they did before, where everybody's staying home. And if it's like my house, you're getting a couple of packages a day, most likely on your doorstep. That causes a lot of freight volume to flow through Georgia and ultimately end up on people's doorsteps to serve their needs for their goods and services that they're getting at home, where in the past they may be out and about getting whatever those deliveries may be. So again, I think a good indicator well, and you'll see how this plays out in a moment. So we've talked about traffic. Traffic turns into consumption of gas and diesel. And so let's look at that. This chart goes back now 3 years, and including this year in the gold is 2021 of consumption of gasoline. Now this chart comes from the EIA prime supplier sales volumes, and it lags about 2 months. So this is the most current data we have, and there is a lag in the reporting of this information. If you look at the red line, that was 2020, and this is by fiscal year. And you can see the effects of COVID that happened, and there you can see the fall off February, March, April. But then in May and June, you can see that consumption picked back up, which translates back to those charts I was just showing you. And as we got into July of this year, this budget year, you can see the gold, it actually started above the consumption from the year ago, went slightly below, but it's now actually tracking right at or slightly above the consumption from a year ago pre-pandemic. Again, another good sign and a positive trend in my opinion. Now let's look at diesel. Diesel consumption is the gold line is 2021, the red is 2020. And as you can see, diesel is higher than it's been, consumption has been in the last 3 budget years. And that is certainly a direct indication of those truck volumes I showed you on the interstate and moving freight throughout Georgia. So that again is a good trend as it relates to consumption, and those things marry up nicely. So now we've had traffic, talked about traffic, we've talked about consumption, that turns into revenues. So let's take a moment and look at revenues. This first chart is dealing only with excise that's on motor fuel, on gas and diesel. So far, year to date through December, motor fuel is tracking up 0.1% year to date. And in fact, since October, the collections have been higher than they were a year ago. So right now, motor fuel is tracking slightly ahead than it was a year ago. as you recall, in the audited collections amount of motor fuel is what is appropriated into the next year, or make sure that's appropriated in the next year. So the FY20 audited collections totaled $1.933 billion. So keep that number in mind. That's what gets appropriated, and that helps what really helps drive our budget. Okay, let me transition now to look at revenue as it relates to fee component. And of course, as you would imagine, hotel fees are down from prior year. I think the good story here, the good news story here, is they're down 29% through December. That, in my opinion, is better than we would have considered going into the pandemic. So collections so far from July through December total $64.5 million. The projection for the year for amended 21 is $82.3 million. The other part of the fee collections are the highway fees. That's the heavy vehicle impact fee and the electric vehicle fee. They're actually up combined a total of 33% year to date. And the projection of those dollars in the amended 21 budget are $15.2 million. The table below is just a graphic representation of a month-to-month comparison. The blue bar is 2020 hotel fees. The sort of orangish bar is the 2021 hotel fees. You can see sort of the differences month to month in hotel fees. And then sort of the smaller bars, the gray being 2020 fees, highway impact fees, and the gold or yellowish is 2021 fees. And you can see how they're actually performing a little better than last year as well, as I talked about. And what we did was just show a projection of that bar, that horizontal bar, FY21 projected, sort of shows you what the remainder of the year looks like based on the projections we received. All right, so we've talked about traffic, consumption, and revenue, but before we get into the budget, I just want to touch base on a federal update as a reminder that our budget also has about $1.6 billion of federal dollars, which is about 40% of the budget is federal. So it's a significant share, and we certainly rely and count on those federal dollars to advance our projects that are so critical. A few things on the federal front. The current transportation funding bill, which was called the FAST Act, actually expired at the end of last federal fiscal year. Now, Congress extended it shortly into December, and then right before the end of the calendar year, they extended it all the way through this federal fiscal year at the same funding levels as previous year. So that's a good thing. That gives us certainty that we have federal dollars going through September of this year. Very important. The other part that happened, as we all know, is the COVID relief funding was part of congressional action there at the end of the calendar year. And it's estimated that through the Federal Highway Administration, Georgia will receive about $322 million. That's additional federal dollars. 14% of that will go to the metropolitan planning organizations, and then the congressional intent had a lot of flexibility in this COVID relief funding, very similar to the CARES Act funding, which had a lot of expanded eligibility to do things that typically federal dollars are not allowed to do, including in maintenance and operations and personnel costs. The other benefit was there was no match required, 100%, where federal is normally 80-20% match. And also it allowed those dollars to be utilized throughout, all the way through federal fiscal year 24. So it gave you sort of time to deploy those dollars. Now this slide probably needed to be updated. We were awaiting guidance and really the rules from Federal Highway of how we can actually utilize these dollars more particularly. And we did get that guidance just 2 evenings ago. So we are actually going through that information now and looking at, the details of how do you use this additional federal money. Our general intent is to be strategic in how we deploy those $322 million, less than what goes to the MPOs. And I say that to say that we plan to put those toward capital projects and capital maintenance projects that are significant, that generate jobs for Georgians and keep Georgians working for a period of time. So our intent is to utilize those dollars as fast as we can, but deliberately, such that, again, the intent of those is to sort of fill some holes, keep Georgians working. So in the transportation arena. Based on what we've seen out of our amended 21 budget and what's in 22 ultimately, we don't see the need that we need to try to cover personnel costs or things like or administrative kind of costs. We want to put those out and put them to good use to do projects across the state. Also, the COVID relief funding had funding for the Federal Transit Administration, about $34.5 million to Georgia. And Chris may touch on this in his presentation, but that's generally probably mostly to MARTA. And there was also Federal Aviation Administration funding that's in support of course, air carriers and the airports, mainly Hartsfield-Jackson in our case. There may be some small dollars as well to our other airports around the state, and we're just still waiting on guidance on those exact dollars. So I've said a lot on the federal update. A lot of things are moving fast. There's still talks of reauthorization of the Transportation Funding Act that needs to happen, and also stimulus is being discussed at the federal level as well. So we're keeping our ears open and paying attention to what happens there, and we'll commit to keep this committee and other committees updated as we go forward as it relates to funding. But I would say good news in that front as well. Now, let me move into the amended 21. This is a representation of the base, the changes to the base, which results in the amended 21. And we have it broken down into excise and non-excise dollars. As you can see, a $159 million increase in excise. And you saw the tables and charts that sort of indicate why that is. Brings it to $1.902 billion. On the left side of the screen under non-excise, you can see the ATL, which that's the fee component going toward funding the ATL. And Chris will talk about that, as well as Greta. So you will see that. Gives the GDOT a budget for amended 21 of $2.034 billion instead of the 1.841 base that we started with. So that's a nice increase of $193.5 million. Now that we see the total, let me take a deeper dive into where those dollars will be deployed and how they'll be used. We always like to show this slide. This is a chart aggregated by aggregating our budget programs together into more functional budgets. So it's a little bit higher level view if you can see where the dollars are actually going. The bar on the left, the biggest bar, represents capital projects. That's capital construction, capital maintenance, and a program called Local Roads Administration. That is the bucket that drives capital projects from design, right-of-way, all the way to construction. And it represents about 48% of our overall state budget. The next bar is general operations, which are 5 budget programs combined together. That's capital construction, departmental admin, also data collections, planning, and traffic management. So we aggregate it. That's all the sort of the work it takes to get those projects ready, aggregates into that bucket, which is 11%. Next is a favorite among all of you. That's the local maintenance improvement grant budget. It is reflective of 10% of the excise collection, which now totals $190.2 million. Next to it, another big bar is the $430.8 million for routine maintenance. That's the men and women and our consultant contractors that do routine and preventative maintenance across the state. I always like to remind people that over half of that budget is contracted out to small business and to others that do things like striping and mowing and guardrail repair. Those upkeep of the house is a lot to call it. Next is payments to CERTA at $88.2 million, which is about 4% of our budget. Also, intermodal at $21.9 million represents about 1%. And then GO bond debt service is about 5% of the state budget. Now, on the next slide, we'll take the deep dive of where the amended $21 will be used. At the very top line is our GO bond debt service. And this chart, might I add, is all about motor fuel. So this is very specific to the fund source being motor fuel. GO bond debt actually was lowered this year due to better rates and debt falling off, about $5.8 million reduction overall in bond debt. We were able to swap through a fund source swap $40.2 million out of motor fuel, and I'll show you on the next slide where that went. A big add was back into capital construction. So when the 21 base budget was in place, we had to defer some projects and push some projects out. We're now able to add $52.6 million back, which will keep those projects from being deferred. Also, we added back, most importantly, back into capital maintenance, $95.6 million. Always want to take care of the state of good repair, taking care of those bridges and roadways. You know, you've got to do the maintenance on your house before you expand your house. So we're able to add those back. The next is the adjustment in LMIG at $15.9 million, again, to be reflective of the excise collections. And then routine maintenance, $35.1 million add back, which helps us do the things that we were going to have to defer to do. This goes back to some money to do more herbicide and treatment of our right-of-ways. Also, our contract litter pickup, we can add that back, some additional striping around the state. And the biggest portion of that goes toward our maintenance contracting that's generally done by small business, veteran-owned, and minority businesses around the state. So that's a very good add back, again, taking care of Georgia's infrastructure. Now let me move into the next slide, which is related to fees and general funds, so the non-excise. As I talked about the GO bond debt being reduced, if you took the $40.2 million that we took out of motor fuel on the last slide, less the $5 million in debt service, then that leaves you $34.3 million of fees going to our GO bond debt payment. There were no changes in intermodal or no changes to payments to CERTA as well. And Madam Chair, that concludes a lengthy report. I'm glad to answer any questions or comments any of the members may have.
Abby, are you there? Because I think they're controlling the IT from the IT department. Do we have any questions?
Madam Chair, I would have a couple if that will be okay. This is Clay.
Please do.
Commissioner, I thank you for your presentation. I thank you for what you do in making the roads and bridges safe. You had mentioned that we did 7,500 basically bridge inspections in 2020. How often are they inspected as a general rule? And it's probably on a scale from those that have points that are made on prior inspections. But how many do we have that we do inspect? I'm sure it's considerably more than that.
Thank you for that question. We inspect every bridge every 2 years at a minimum, and that's a federal requirement. And as I mentioned, we do that for city-owned bridges and county-owned bridges as well. Federal funding is tagged to making sure that those inspections are done. So we feel like that's an important service to provide, such that we don't jeopardize any federal funding to the state should there be a problem with a city or county being able to do that. But you are absolutely right. Based on bridge conditions, there's bridges that we will inspect more often if they have a certain point rating. And so our bridge inspectors will certainly look at those more frequently based on the condition that they're in. And if it's one of those bridges that we have to look at often, we want to get it on that replacement list, whether it be a local bridge, or a state-owned bridge.
Madam Chair, can I have a follow-up on that? Hearing no opposition, I'm going to go
Yes,
ahead.
you can.
And you mentioned you wanted to, one of the reasons for the bridge inspections is for the locals to make sure that they still qualify for the federal funds. The COVID relief money, 322 million. I'm assuming that is as a result of less traffic on the road, less excise, which we actually did not see in the state of Georgia, but we're thankful for the 322. I do know that some of our COVID relief funds that we initially received, there were stipulations with the federal granting of those funds that they must be used for such and such a purpose. If they were not, then the state owed them back. In terms of 14% or $45 million of the 322 going to the MPOs, are there restrictions on how those funds are used? And are we contingently liable if they are not used for such a purpose? So I suppose that's A and B.
Okay, so in these COVID funds, these were dedicated basically to surface transportation through USDOT and ultimately federal highway. And so they do have a period that if they're not used by September 2024, they would lapse. These funds were added a little differently than the previous CARES Act or other COVID funding in that it comes to states through their transportation formula. And so each state got their normal sort of share, if you will. And so they are being administered through that method. And so they are subject to be used for transportation purposes through federal highway. And that's one of the things, as I was mentioning, we're trying to parse through all the rules and regulations that came along with those to understand. I think back sort of the bridge, could that be used for a local bridge? They could be used for a local bridge. We're just having to understand what that means. It may be that if we were using state funds to replace a local bridge, we may now have to follow the other federal guidelines to use those dollars. That was part of my covert speak of saying we're going to be strategic and figure out how to use these dollars the most effective way we can. And so, we'll have to stay tuned as we sort of craft those plans and figure out how best to deploy those strategically such that we can do things. Like I said, we'd like to get these dollars into the economy and to make transportation infrastructure improvement as fast as possible. But we don't want to rush it such that, there's a quick ramp up and a ramp down. And, that's not as good for our economy since we're here today, not knowing exactly how long this situation may last. One thing I'd like to add in and sort of make sure I may have given you too rosy of a picture. We're very excited to see the traffic volumes of where they are and sort of above where they were potentially last year, but we still are below what we would have been prior to COVID-19. I think we're still probably at least 50 million or more of where we probably thought we would have been absent COVID, of where we were sort of looking forward in one budget year. And then that sort of compounds into this of 21 as well. So over a couple of years, I think we're probably down between 20, 21 and 22. I'm guessing we're down $300 million of how we were trajecting we thought we would do. And now that's Russell's forecast, and I'm not an economist. I just play one here at DOT sometimes, but based on our projections of what we thought we were doing, I think that's where we'd be. They're trying to share that number with me now, so I'm gonna look away so they can share that number. What?
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
Yes.
Please go
Chad,
right ahead.
I'd love to ask a question. First of all, let me just say it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm one day old on this committee and sorry to join a little late, had the wrong login information that your staff, Chairman Taylor, was able to get to me rather efficiently. However, infrastructure as part of your portfolio. Commissioner Russell, it's certainly good to be with you. Are the sound barriers that are on the sides of the road infrastructure, do they come under your purview?
They do if they're on a state route or interstate. Yes, sir.
I can't tell you how many times I get calls from residents who either wish to have them or them to be maintained. And perhaps at a more appropriate time, I will get you some locations where, because of the storms that we've had recently, they're no longer barriers to sound, or some communities are in need of them.
We'll be glad to follow up with you, Representative Mitchell.
Thank you. You're on mute, Madam Chair.
Do you still have a question?
No, that's it, Madam Chair. I previously couldn't hear you. I don't know about the others.
I'm not real good at technology. Let's just put it that way. Thank you. Did we have any other questions? And welcome to the committee, by the way.
Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, I have one more, if that is,
Please go ahead.
if I'm not speaking out of turn. Federal monies are notoriously late on arrival. Have we received those, or we are anticipating receiving them shortly?
Yes, sir. Since they administer these COVID dollars through sort of the traditional federal process, those numbers have been loaded into the federal financial management system. So we should be able to access those very soon. But they actually have been, quote, loaded into the financial system that we have to work through. So that's good news.
Madam Chair, if I may, just one moment.
Please go right ahead.
Commissioner, this is Jay Collins out here in House District 68 out in Billerica. I just want to give a big shout out to our district engineer, Grant Waldrop. And, you know, as you well know, we've had this project going on here on I-20 for a long time, and it becomes very burdensome from time to time. And he is always willing to go out on a limb and help us, and just goes above and beyond what he should do sometimes. And I just want to give him a shout out and say thank you to him and his staff, and for you and your staff and what you do for us.
Thank you for that. And I'll certainly pass that along. And I just want to, again, thank you and all your constituents and everybody in that greater area for the continued patience of basically rebuilding the interstate under live traffic. And it's been a challenge and difficult project. And can't say enough about all the first responders and police and sheriff in that whole corridor for what they've done through a very challenging time. And I understand that we're on track for April, and man, that'll be a great day. I know you can't wait. Neither can we. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to add my thanks to the department. They have done an outstanding job meeting the needs. I will tell you, in South Georgia, we've had lots of things the last couple of years between hurricanes, and your people were right there. They were instrumental in getting us cleaned up and roads cleared. And they're always cooperative. You really have a good team there that you work with. And I have enjoyed working with you, and I really do appreciate what they do. And it's not even during this pandemic. They're there, work is being completed, and pass it on that it is greatly appreciated, and we acknowledge the efforts that they're putting forth. We appreciate that. Anybody else? Thank you. Okay, appreciate that. Let's move on if we could. We have, let's see, the Executive Director of the State Roads and Tollway, Director Chris Tomlinson. Are you ready to share with us?
I am. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Also, welcome to members of the committee who aren't familiar with me. Let me get my screen sharing going here. Is everyone able to see the screen?
I think so.
Yes. So good afternoon, Madam Chair, as well as good afternoon to the incoming Mr. Chairman, Chairman Perkle. Looking forward to working with each of you on the various committees as well as the membership of this subcommittee. Again, my name is Chris Tomlinson. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Executive Director for the state's 3 mobility authorities, CERTA, GRETA, and the ATL. Also connected online is our CFO, Monique Simmons. So she'll be available if there's some questions that you have at the end that I may need additional assistance with. The slide on your screen, I just want to provide you just an overview of the various functions of the 3 authorities. CERTA, the State Road and Tollway Authority, everyone knows us as the Peach Pass people, and we'll certainly touch on that today. But we're also involved in innovative funding and financing programs, most notably the Infrastructure Bank, which I'll be speaking about, and working in close partnership with our partners at DOT on transportation P3 projects. The ATL is our new regional transit planning authority for Metro Atlanta, created by the General Assembly in 2018. So we'll be talking about its functions, both on the planning as well as the operation side. And the last but certainly not least, GRETA, Georgia Regional Transportation Authority, which for many years was focused on the express service. But as we'll discuss, the budget for express and those operations have been moved under the ATL. All 3 have one common focus, and that's mobility. Most of our work focuses on Metro Atlanta region, but through the State Road and Tollway Authority, we do have statewide jurisdiction for some of our programs, such as the Infrastructure Bank. Before I get into the specifics of the amended budget, I'd like to just point out that overall, all 3 budgets are remaining flat, or at least that's the recommendation for the governor. So we have no requested changes for AFY 21. That being said, I do have some specific information related to each that I want to share, as well as some information as to the impact that COVID has had on our agency operations. And while I'll speak to the specific details of COVID on later slides, I'd certainly want to take this opportunity to publicly express my thanks to our frontline workers, the men and women who operate and clean our transit buses, as well as man our walk-up customer service center, who have continued to fulfill their obligations and interact with customers throughout the pandemic. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is that not only will I talk about some of the impacts, near-term impacts COVID's had, but we are trying to leverage this situation to make some long-term changes that increase our efficiency. The one we're most proud of is that our customer service representatives who answer calls related to Peach Pass and Express, all of those positions have been moved to being 100% remote, with the exception of when they come in for training or coaching. This is a good long-term change, which I think will have multiple benefits to our operations. With that, I'll go ahead and get into the governor's recommendations for AFY 2021. So starting with the ATL, as I mentioned, the budget remains flat. For those that may be new to the committee, again, I want to remind you that the express service has moved over to the ATL, and that comprises the lion's share of the $12.8 million in funds. Specifically, $10.7 million supports the express operations, and the remaining $2.1 million of our budget supports the ATL planning function and related positions. On the planning side of the house, the ATL recently submitted its 2020 annual report and audit of transit services in the region. That is an annual requirement due December 1st of each year, a copy of which is submitted to the House and Senate Transportation Committee chairs. If any of the members of this committee want a copy, we'll be happy to provide that. It's a great place to get a compendium of information of all the different transit services, fixed route transit services that are operating in the Metro Atlanta region. Think of it as a one-stop place to find information on budgets, performance, ridership, and related data. And again, that's updated each and every year. We also recently approved the 2020 ATL Regional Transit Plan. I go ahead and mention this at this point because with the pandemic, we had to rethink how we handle the public outreach components of that work. And we developed a virtual open house. But we also conducted certain meetings in person for those that may not have been able to get online or access online resources. We believe that this is very successful, and it is an approach that we plan to maintain even after the pandemic. But turning back to the bulk of where this money goes, which is the express operations, express regional commuter bus service. On the next slide, I'd like to outline some of the COVID-19 measures that the express service has undertaken. So, as everyone is probably aware, transit has been especially hard hit by the pandemic. In order to continue to provide the service in as safe a manner as possible, we made multiple operational changes. We have limited capacity on the buses to no more than 50% capacity. We're carrying much less than that, but we want people to know that even as ridership returns, we're going to maintain social distancing as best as possible on a bus. We've also reduced routes so that we have more coaches available so we can again maintain that social distancing as ridership returns. We've been in constant communication with customers, either through social media channels, as well as our audio-visual systems on the buses, providing everything from the latest CDC guidance to specific messages about the service. We've provided PPE to the operators and field staff, as well as requiring that the bus operators maintain and wear a mask while they're operating in the fields. Last year, as everyone was readjusting to the pandemic, we, along with several other Metro Atlanta transit operators, temporarily suspended fares. Those were reinstituted in August of last year. We also launched a contactless payment pilot. This is essentially allowing people to use their mobile phones to buy their fare products and not have to interact directly with agents or even, let's say, breeze bending machines. This is just in the pilot phase, but we do believe that this is the future of how fares will be purchased. And so we look forward to leveraging this time and experience to better this new payment method. And we increased our cleaning regimen to daily. Every single vehicle in the fleet that is deployed operationally undergoes a disinfecting cleaning every single day that it's in operation. And last but not least, we are in the research about to enter to the procurement phase for ionization devices. This is literally a device that'll be added into the HVAC system of the buses, and it ionizes or essentially charges the air so that the very air itself is helping neutralize the virus. This is perfectly safe technology that's been used in the food service industry for years, has been recently adapted for the travel industry. Most, if not all of the measures that I've outlined would continue forward even after the pandemic's behind us. Turning to Greta, and again, you saw some of these numbers in Commissioner McMurray's presentation. Greta, again, is flat, has a budget of just over $300,000. The Greta budget is focused on its statutory functions now that it's no longer in the transit operations business. Specifically, those responsibilities remaining with Greta include approving the TIP, or the Transportation Improvement Program. This is Metro Atlanta's 6-year fiscally constrained transportation plan that lists all transportation projects that are receiving federal funds, be those GDOT, MARTA, Express, local governments, et cetera. We work on this in conjunction with the Atlanta Regional Commission, but that final sign off on behalf of the governor is one of Greta's key responsibilities. This funding also supports the staff that reviews what's known as developments of regional impact. These are large-scale developments happening in the Metro Atlanta region that are reviewed by Greta's staff to understand its impact on current as well as future transportation and traffic in the region around the developments. And last but not least, Greta is also charged with air quality tracking and reporting, which is done in conjunction with both DOT and the Atlanta Regional Commission. As I said, there's no changes in the budget. However, there was some updates to the language of the purpose statement. You would find that in your tracking document at 16.14.1, but it was just updated again to reflect that Greta is no longer in the transit operations business, and the edits just reflect the areas that I just mentioned. Turning to the State Road and Tollway Authority. The two numbers that you see under both motor fuel and state general funds, the combined number appeared in GDOT's presentation. That combined number of those two numbers is the 88.822 million that you saw in GDOT's presentation. But that breaks down to 13.4 million in motor fuel funds and $75.3 million in state general funds. How this combined budget is broken out is a SERTA budget of that number, $9.9 million goes to the Infrastructure Bank program, which I'm going to discuss on the next slide. $10 million goes to support the operations related to the I-85 extension, the I-75 South Metro Express lanes, and the Northwest Corridor Express lanes. And the remaining $69 million goes towards debt service on our Garvey bonds. So again, the bulk of it goes to debt service, and it's only in the case of the Infrastructure Bank and this $10 million for operations support. Everything else is for debt service. While I'm on this slide, and this is going back to something the commissioner mentioned about traffic volumes. At the start of the pandemic, express lane usage dropped to approximately 21% of normal levels, and gross toll revenues dropped to approximately 12% of their pre-COVID levels. That's going back to the March-April timeframe. Since that time, month over month, we've seen a slow but steady increase in return in volumes. I'm happy to report that express lane usage across the system for the week of December 13th was at 68% of their pre-COVID levels, and gross toll revenues were at approximately 56% of their pre-COVID levels. We do anticipate that our numbers from mid-December through mid-January due to the holidays will be down, but that's typical for that time of year. And we anticipate still continuing to see the slow but steady increase. As Commissioner McMurray pointed out, in the metro areas, we are seeing traffic within 10% of their pre-COVID levels. And as some of you, I'm sure, are seeing or have experienced now that the session's back in, there are times where you can't see any difference between what you experienced prior to the pandemic. The mix of traffic is different. For those of you who've ever heard me talk about transit, a year ago I was talking about electric scooters and how they appeared out of nowhere. Now it is the Amazon delivery trucks that are ubiquitous and everywhere. But that traffic is driving more people back into the express lanes. And so the long-term forecast is solid. Going back to the appropriated budget though, as I mentioned, approximately just under $10 million, $9.9 million goes into the Infrastructure Bank program. GTIB, as we refer to it, has been a wildly successful program since its launch in 2010. Through round 7, We've awarded a little over 133 awards, a total of $151 million in grants and loans, which has enabled projects with a combined value of just under $1 billion to move forward. The map that you see on your screen has a star indicating every single location where each grant since 2010 has been awarded. Obviously, you see a heavy concentration in Metro Atlanta. A lot of that is due to the community improvement districts that have been established, well established in that area. But we're very proud of our outreach efforts as we try to look across the state, because this is a statewide program. Currently, we're evaluating round 8, which is a loan-only round. And we've worked very diligently to try to identify potential projects throughout the state. Recommendations for round 8 will be presented to the SERTA board in February. We're looking forward to future rounds. If any members of this committee don't see a star anywhere in their district, by all means, feel free to contact me offline. But most importantly, we want to talk to you. We want to talk to the local governments in your area, because what we don't want to ever have happen is that someone's unaware of this program, and so we haven't received applications from an area. So we're committed to spreading the word of this program. I touched on a lot of different areas, but because, again, our amended budget, we had no changes, I just want to give you some general information. I do look forward to getting back in front of this committee with the FY22 budget, which will have some different items, but I'm happy to take any questions today on the amended budget, or any general questions you have about the 3 authorities.
Do we have any questions?
Madam Chair, I have a couple, if it's okay.
Please go right ahead.
You mentioned regarding the COVID protocols that you went through with the express system. One of the comments that you made, and I was unsure what it really meant, was you reduced routes. Does that mean you reduced where they go, or how many buses are doing it, or I was unsure what reduced?
No, great question. Pre-COVID, Express runs 27 routes from 27 different park and rides. We've reduced our overall service by approximately 50%. So what we did was, there are many runs. Those are multiple iterations on a route that we either eliminated, but we maintained at least one morning and one afternoon trip on all 27 routes. So put another way, we had some where, due to volumes, it would have been 5 or 6 different runs in the morning. Some of those have been reduced to just 2, and but a minimum of at least one morning and afternoon pair has been maintained in the entire system.
Okay, how many passengers a day are we transporting on that system?
Currently, we're transporting anywhere from 650 to just under 800 passengers per day. That is down from literally thousands. We are currently at about 10% of our pre-COVID level of passengers.
Wow.
That is typical for long distance commuter service. Many of our customers, in fact, the majority of the Express customers have cars. It's not generally a transit dependent population. So they're either teleworking or driving. Contrast that with local transit, and I'm talking not only MARTA, but say Cobb, Gwinnett. Even during the height of the pandemic, their ridership dipped on local transit to about 50%. So people are still using and relying on the bus service. MARTA's rail is down 60%, so they're at about 40%. And the other 2 entities who have express service, which are Cobb and Gwinnett, they are also right at around 10% ridership on theirs.
You also mentioned regarding the express lanes, those are also down. You mentioned, I think, a 68%. Is that by the number of vehicles or revenue? I noticed that I use I use that quite regularly, and I noticed that it has gone up some. So I just didn't know if we were tracking vehicles on it or if we're tracking revenue from it.
We're tracking both. So right now, our traffic volume is at 68%. So we're down 32% from normal in terms of number of trips. Revenue is at 56% of normal. And even though you are correct, Mr. Chairman, that you've seen the rates going up because some of that volume has returned, the rates are nowhere near their pre-COVID peaks. So revenue will trail the volume unless the congestion really spikes, because our rates are dynamic and congestion affects how high the individual tolls are.
Okay, anybody else have any questions?
I do, Madam Chairman. Rick Jasper.
Please. Yes.
Hey, Chris.
Oh, you're muted, Mr. Chairman.
You need to unmute.
Still muted.
There we go.
Yes.
I thought I did that.
Oh, it went back, Mr. Chairman. I don't know, Abby, can you unmute him?
How's that?
Mr. There you go.
Don't touch anything, right? Well, Chairman Perkle and Chris just got a text from my wife saying, whatever. Express lane's going to save my hide before it clicks me off again. I-75 is closed northbound to Jasper.
Oh, no.
But we appreciate it. And Madam Chairman, thank you for letting me be on today.
Well, you're quite welcome. Are there any other questions? I want to take this opportunity to thank the agencies. Y'all have done a great job keeping me informed and keeping our roads flowing and being built, and it's greatly appreciated. Abby, I don't know how you do all you do, but you've kept me straight, and I really appreciate it. And it's been a great experience for me to be on this committee, and I'm very happy to be handing it over to a very capable Clay Perkle. We're looking forward to that. Appreciate that. And I think you've gotten a dose today of how good these agencies are and what a great job they do for Georgia. And every member of the committee, really, thank you so much. You've been attentive, you've participated, and that's what makes our government work in Georgia. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any other comments? Then I guess we can adjourn and thank everyone and look forward to seeing y'all next week. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.